everyone to session 2 of the past, present, and future of Centers for Independent Living, facilitating pre-employment transition services or pre-ETS. This is session 2 of this community, and our topic today is going to be mapping CIL services for in-school youth. We're joined by our facilitators, Lindsay Miller and Troy Hall from Able, South Carolina. And I'll give them a chance to reintroduce themselves in just a second. And if we could go to the next slide. I'll just go over our accommodations for today. And sorry, I forgot to mention my name is Megan Ketchel. I'm the project manager for the Disability Employment TA Center. So I'll just be here helping out in the background and introducing today's session. So all of our e-learning community sessions have CART closed captioning services, and those should be available for you in the Zoom meeting today. If you require any other types of accommodations like ASL interpretation, we ask that you reach out 3 days in advance of each session to let us know at the DETAC Gmail inbox that is shown on the slide here. And we can go to the next slide. This is just a quick reminder of the ground rules. We really just hope that this is something that you can actively participate in. You'll have access to the team of subject matter experts between DETAC and Able South Carolina, and come prepared to discuss your successes and challenges with your peers and facilitators, whether that's contributing through chat or over verbally when it's time. From there, I think I'll go to the next slide and we'll turn it over to, oh, sorry, here's our agenda for today. But we're just kind of going over introductions. Then I'll turn it over to our facilitators to go through the core of our content today, and we'll close out and give you some next steps. And next slide. And with that, I will turn it over to Troy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us again, or if you're joining us for the first time, it's so great to see everybody. This is the second in a 4-part series. We're going to be talking about mapping, mapping transition services. Going to start with a quick introduction of myself. So I am Troy Hall. I am a white male with brown hair. I am not wearing glasses in my view, but on the screen there's a picture of myself wearing glasses. Pronouns are he, him. I am the director of youth transition programs for Able, South Carolina. So that means all of the really fun, awesome youth initiatives that we have in South Carolina to serve transition age youth and get them ready for adulthood. I get to have a hand in all of those. And I'm here with my co-facilitator and co-worker, Miss Lindsay Miller, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Miller. My pronouns are she, her. I've got a picture of myself up on this screen, and I'm in your little viewfinder as a Black woman with black hair, wearing glasses. And I am wearing actually blue in the picture and blue today. So as a happy coincidence, I'm wearing blue both instances. And I am the pre-employment transition services coordinator. So I get to work with all of our youth transition specialists who go into schools and provide the pre-employment transition services. I get to coordinate with schools along with our partner agencies to facilitate those transition services lessons. And I get to teach a little bit in schools myself. So I get to kind of do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, excellent. So we are going to start off by just doing a quick review of our last session where we talked about pre-ETS services and the rationale for why Centers for Independent Living are the ones that are best suited to be serving in-school youth. So on this screen, it's got the title of this section and then a small icon of a figure of a man with some indicator lines and check marks out of it. So just as a refresher, just as a reminder, one of those core transition services that you're going to hear us talk about a lot about, maybe one of the more important ones, is establishing a foundation of pre-ETS. So those pre-employment transition services, those are those skills that are mandated under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act of 2014. Part of that comprehensive act was to make sure that vocational rehabilitation agencies reserve 15% of their funding to provide pre-ETS to eligible students with disabilities. And in South Carolina, that's 13 to 21. And a lot of other places, it might be 14 to 21. Let's keep going. So those pre-ETS skills are designed to make sure that youth with disabilities can access appropriate supports and that those students with disabilities can find and obtain all of the necessary skills that they need to get that competitive, gainful employment after high school, right? Or if they're looking to further their education in some sort of post-secondary education opportunity, that they have all the skills to be successful in doing that. And in hand with that is also making sure they have the skills to achieve their level of desired independent living. So those services are kind of split into 5 categories. And that's, you can go forward, Lindsay. Those 5 main categories, that those work-based learning experiences, that self-advocacy, that job exploration, that post-secondary exploration. So all of those skills designed to make sure that students have a full, comprehensive set of tools to achieve employment, to pursue secondary education, and to live independently in line with their skills, interests, and abilities. So how we collaborate, how we make sure that youth can have a foundation of these skills. There's a couple of different agencies that play a key role in that. One of those is, of course, going to be vocational rehabilitation. So they are going to be the experts in rehab services and really in vocational services, right? So we're thinking about job placement, job counseling, career assessment, work-based learning opportunities, supporting during work opportunities. As adults, you know that they also provide support for maintaining employment or obtaining new employment, but especially when we're thinking about youth in those transition roles, they're going to be there at those early stages to make sure that youth are on track to achieve their vocational goals and that those goals are in line with their skills, interests, and abilities. And then, of course, there's the Department of Education. So that's going to be governing the school side of things, right? So they're going to be supporting school districts. And they, as the experts in special education, are going to make sure that teachers have all of the tools they need to support students, that they're using best practices, they have access to technical assistance and training, and that when we are doing things like building IEPs, when we're doing school-based enterprises, we're doing that in the most effective service to students with disabilities. So the other really important agency sort of in this circle of services is Centers for Independent Living, right? So Centers for Independent Living, we are advocacy agencies. We are the disability representation. So that means that we are going to be the agency that pushes for disability rights. We're going to be experts in self-advocacy. We're the ones who are going to show the effectiveness of peer-to-peer learning, peer mentoring, making sure services are accessible, not just the direct services that a CIL might provide, but also those services within schools, those services within VR, the services in the community, making sure they're accessible. And of course, that independent living component, we're going to be the experts in making sure that that is on everybody's radar, that we're all working towards that, and that it's a supported goal. And of course, one of the big things about Centers for Independent Living is because we are staffed with at least 50% people with disabilities, because our board is at least 50% people with disabilities, we can come from that genuine peer perspective, right? So we are not just serving the disability community, we are serving our own community that we're a part of. So we're going to be able to create that rapport with students. We're going to be able to speak to students from our own lived experience. Not that disability is a monolith, but we can pull on these sort of common threads in our lives. So I'm a person with a disability. Mine happens to be invisible. It affects my memory. But a lot of the people I work with are also people with disabilities. A lot of the young people who are out there providing these direct services to youth in schools in South Carolina are people with disabilities. So it's just incredibly important. And just a quick note, a lot of times outside agencies can kind of just see us as sort of a service provider, right? We're just someone that you refer to, and then we do this one specific thing. But I really want to remind everybody that as a Center for Independent Living, our role is much bigger than that. Yes, we can provide services. Yes, we can provide knowledge, but we are also advocates, right? We are the ones who are going to be pushing for change. We're going to be the ones who are pushing for equity, who are reshaping laws, who are reshaping practices. And hopefully we're also going to be instilling that same sense of advocacy within the young people that we work with. So we're going to be helping that next generation of leaders to shape the world in a way that's much more equitable and kind of fighting for disability justice. So what does it look like when we all sort of work together, right? So let's look at some of the data just as a recap of some of the stuff we talked about. We know that those disability-led services are understudied, frankly, because there's just not a lot of them, right? But we know when we use that sort of peer-to-peer mentoring model, we know that whenever people with disabilities are the ones that are providing services to people with disabilities, that's going to be a lot more successful than when non-disabled people try and teach those same skills, right? It's not because our allies who are not people with disabilities, it's not because of lack of any sort of knowledge or talent. It's just because they don't have that genuine peer aspect to fall back on, right? So if you do have that as a tool, we want to make sure that we're using it. We also know that the data shows that all of these value-based principles that sort of guide a CILs programs, that sort of guide what a professional who works at a Center for Independent Living does, that's going to lead to the most effective practices, right? So making sure that we are keeping things person-centered, making sure that we're prioritizing accessibility, all of those sort of values that are spread without all of our services. The more that we can rely on those and the more that we can ask our partner agencies to share those, the more effective these transition practices are going to be. So let's go to that next slide. So what does this actually look like, right? What does this really look like when we're thinking about collaboration to provide the most effective transition services? What can a Center for Independent Living do when they're working with, say, schools, right? One of the things that we can do is try and make sure that those individualized education programs, those IEPs, we want to make sure that we are pushing for student-led initiatives, okay? Starting really early on, building those skills, using the parental involvement if it's there, but making sure that this is not a program where youth are kind of not attending meetings or they're sort of sitting idly by, but that they understand the point of those meetings, that they have an active voice in them, and that they're the ones directing those core services in line with their skills, interests, and abilities. Another thing we can do is we can remove those ableist barriers, right? We know that even though we have really, really amazing educational partners and people who do not go into education for the money, they go into education because they want to make a big difference, right? We also know that because of how old that system is, there's just a lot of ableism that we have to fight against. So working with schools to kind of restructure in non-ableist ways, that's something the Center for Independent Living can do. And then making sure that teachers, parents, families, and of course, especially youth are aware of all of the laws that give them equity and access, right? Do they understand what the IDEA provides? Do they understand what the ADA provides, right? Do they understand when these things change? What happens when you turn 18? We can be the content experts to share that information and to make it accessible so everyone knows their role. This and many, many other things. When it comes to vocational rehabilitation, so those experts in job placement or building those job skills so that people with disabilities can get employment, right? Centers for Independent Living, we can be the other side of that coin that really teaches self-advocacy to make sure that a consumer within VR is pushing for all the services that they need, right? We know, and Voc Rehab will be the first people to say it, that one of the things that they're trying to restructure is making sure that people with disabilities don't kind of fall into those 4F categories, right? Making sure that they're actually finding ways to create customized employment that are in line with the student's interest. We can be the ones to kind of help push for that. We can also make sure that when Voc Rehab gives assistive technology, is it the best possible fit? Is there something we can add to it? Can we give specific training, right? Can we refer to community resources if Voc Rehab doesn't have something that's needed? And then, of course, we can make sure that consumers who are working with Voc Rehab have those independent living skills. It is obviously essential to have a job, to have an income, but if you don't have the independent living skills to back that up, you're not really going to get long-term success, right? Just as a reminder that Rehab Act of 1973 that created VR also created Centers for Independent Living. We are kind of two sides of the same coin. So it's really important to remember that even though one agency might be bigger than the other, the funding might be different, we really are designed to work in tandem, right? Sometimes that also means holding VR accountable. So Centers for Independent Living have a really big role in supporting these transition services. Let's keep going, Lindsay. Okay, I just did a lot of talking. Let me do a quick check in the chat. Give me a thumbs up emoji. Give me a good in the chat. Give me something to let me know how we are feeling about things. Does that sound like a pretty good recap? If you were here last time, did I miss anything? We feel like we're all on the same page. Okay, seeing a couple of thumbs up. All right. Okay, good. So y'all were kind enough to complete a survey last time to talk about the Pre-ETS services that y'all are currently providing. So what I was able to do is kind of go through some of those and then pull out some common threads, some really awesome things that some of y'all are doing, and then a lot of the barriers that you're also running into. So let's take a look at those real quick. Okay, some of the services that are already being provided, if we look kind of under the scope of work readiness skills, a lot of y'all are supporting different styles of employment workshops, right? So some sort of skill building opportunity so young people can go there and develop those work readiness skills. A lot of great work with summer programs at VR. So maybe those in-school services are a little tough, but there is a little more avenue to be working with VR during the summer and supporting them. Love that collaboration, focusing on workplace readiness and training. And then I also saw a lot of paid internship programs, making sure we're connected to those or even creating those where needed. Incredible. We want to make sure that if we are guiding a young person to an internship program, that it is a paid opportunity if possible. As someone who did a very long internship that was not paid, I can go ahead and tell you having a paid internship makes a big, big difference. When we look at self-advocacy and leadership skill development, that is something that's where CILs really shine. So a lot of y'all had some really great self-advocacy training. A lot of self-empowerment courses. A lot of y'all reported that this was the first opportunity young people had to really learn about self-advocacy. And then a lot of y'all had kind of linked this idea of self-advocacy and building these skills directly with the IEP, which is wonderful. Lindsay's probably going to talk some about how we've done some of that. It's really a natural fit together. Let's keep going. When we look at those independent living skills, again, that's a Center for Independent Living's bread and butter. A lot of y'all had some really, really comprehensive programs. Some of that focusing on transition into adulthood, but some of that focusing on transition into the community from places like nursing homes or facilities. That's obviously incredibly important. Some of you had some really innovative programs focusing on healthy living, which is wonderful. A lot of youth transition programs to focus on those really practical skills of how do you search for a job? How do you build a resume, right? How do you navigate an interview? So even though those are things that VR can definitely help with, we are also able to help with that, right? And provide a different perspective on it. Building those independent living skills. I saw at least one cooking workshop. I would really love to hear about that. And then lots of community engagement, right? So again, those internship programs are a great opportunity to interact with the community. A lot of y'all had some good relationships with middle schools, even though high schools may have been tougher to get involved with. The middle schools were a little more eager to open the door. Making sure that career preparedness agencies, you sort of had a hand in working with them. There was one program I heard about that collaborated directly with nursing students for disability education. So making sure that we're providing that technical assistance to professionals, but that we're also creating avenue for people with disabilities to become those professionals too. And a lot of community-based workshops. Y'all had so much good stuff. I was not able to capture all of it, but we are going to have some time for y'all to share out too. So here's a fair warning. Some of y'all are going to have to come off mute or put something good in the chat. So I'm mentally preparing you now. But I do also want to point out some of the common barriers that we saw, right? So, and what I'm going to do is, as I read these out, just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat, or come off mute and say yes if this is a barrier that you feel like you've experienced. One of them is going to be funding. Does anybody feel like they have all of their funding completely figured out? Yeah. I feel like we do a really great job with our transition programs, and I say we absolutely still have room to grow in that, 100%. So how do you sustain programs beyond their original funding cycles, right? Obviously, a lot of these funding opportunities are going to be asking you before they even award funding. How do you plan to continue this? A lot of funding can kind of be unstable. A lot of this depends on referrals. And then a lot of y'all have some really creative fee for service models, but it's hard to get people to really invest in them. One of the other barriers that I saw was outreach, right? So if you have a great program, how do you tell people about it? How do you integrate it into like a school where the population is already there? Okay. How do you really get some of these skill building workshops you have and mesh them with the existing school structure? A big one is going to be taking these programs and making sure they're individualized and engaging, right? So we can have a really great idea of what a youth needs, but how do we make it engaging? How do we make a young person and a young person with a disability see the value of it? How do we create that buy-in? And how do we make sure that if they come to a workshop, they don't stay awake for the first 15 minutes and then put their head on the desk for the rest of the time, right? How do we really make it something that they want to be a part of? And part of that's also individualizing it, right? We know that when we're working with young people, especially if they have specific accommodations or support needs, we have to be able to support a lot of people with different needs at the same time within one program. So Lindsay's going to talk a little bit about some ways we do that. All right, so this is, I feel like this is the big one, is our coordination, right? How do we collaborate with our partners? We talked a lot about how these pre-ETS skills, these transition services, they're not something that we can do on our own. It's a collaboration with schools. It's a collaboration with VR, and that can be tough. That can be difficult. Some of y'all are really struggling to kind of start that. Some of y'all have kind of opened the door, but it stayed in a really small capacity. And some of y'all have kind of had up and down bumpy relationships with VR and schools and really any outside partners. And then a lot of y'all reported that kind of being able to measure the long-term impact of these programs. So maybe you have a great program, maybe you're really proud of it, you got some people going to it, you feel like it's going really well, but how do you know that it's really effective? How do you know that you're really making that difference in helping young people transition into adulthood? So before Miss Lindsay jumps in, I would love to hear from y'all, and this can be in the chat. If some of y'all one or two of y'all wants to come off mute, I'd love to hear what is maybe the biggest barrier you feel like you are facing. I'm going to give y'all a teacher's pause to do it. So anyone feeling brave? What's a barrier y'all are facing? I'm seeing some things in the chat. So collaboration with schools, VR. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Give me a thumbs up. Does anybody else feel like collaboration's an issue? Oh, look at that. Yeah. VR is bidding out pre-ETS. How do we do that? Outreach, right? How do we find new schools to even begin pre-ETS with? Whew. I feel like y'all must have been sitting in some of the meetings we had a few months ago. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm seeing a big theme, and this was backed by what y'all put in the survey too. It's less about creating the programs and making sure that they are disability led. And it's more of how do you get people engaged in those programs, and how do you have beneficial relationships with schools and vocational rehabilitation? Yes, absolutely. And then sometimes you've got partners at odds, right? Because vocational rehabilitation is a federal agency, because they have a whole lot of red tape that they have to work around. They're very afraid of duplication of services, being able to present really clean data under audit. And sometimes that does look like maybe barring us from going into schools when we see an opportunity, right? Sometimes schools really want us in there, but VR says, wait, hold on, you know? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not gonna speak for Lindsay since she has boots on the ground. But I can say I've been a youth transition specialist. I've been a pre-ETS coordinator with us. I was also a VR employee in a former life. And these are barriers that have existed for a really long time from all sides. So with that, and knowing kind of what we can do to provide the most efficient information for y'all, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Lindsay Miller, and she is going to walk y'all through how we provide pre-ETS currently and some of the things we've done to get around some of these barriers.
And Troy and Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind, I got a question in the chat. I think some folks are curious of whether everyone on the line already has pre-ETS programs in place or kind of what phase they're in. I don't know if that's something we could ask folks to chat in, to share, to kind of where they are with their pre-ETS program implementations.
I love it. I think that's a great framework. So can you all just put in the chat if y'all do not have a pre-ETS program? That's just a goal that y'all have, is to serve youth in or out of schools with pre-ETS. Is there anyone who that is not a service that y'all have yet? Okay. And then are y'all maybe providing this as a service, but it's small, it needs to expand? You're running into barriers that are stalling it. Sounds like a lot of y'all are also just starting, so that's great. You can learn from our years of mistakes and experience. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I love this chat. This is great. This is great. Working in several schools, but trying to expand. Just started serving youth who completed high school. Yep. Oh, Lindsay, tell me if this doesn't sound familiar. We had a great one until VR changed some of the rules. Yeah. Changed the way they're paying their vendors. Now we're having to change things. We have a transition program, but it's not specifically pre-ETS. Getting into schools is a mystery. I almost thought that said misery, and I was going to say you called it, but a mystery as well. Yeah, a lack of VR referrals. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Finally getting back to those pre-COVID numbers. Yes, thank you so much for saying that. Okay. And then competing with another VR contractor. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for kind of giving us that groundwork. Absolutely. We're going to have time for questions at the end, but I also want y'all to feel free. Ask questions whenever. As soon as they come to the tip of your head, please feel free. Throw it in the chat. Raise your virtual hand. Unmute yourself. Whatever you need to do. Yeah. Yes, and just a reminder, the people who are on this call, sales from all over the country. So yes, that does mean that some of y'all are on order of selection, some of y'all are not, some of y'all are completely referral based, some of y'all are not. So this is going to look a little different. So for context, South Carolina is not on order of selection. And our Voc rehab services actually provide a lot of in-house services instead of contracting out. So just some context, but I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be widely applicable. So with that, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, I'm going to pass it over to Mr.
Thanks, Troy. Hi, everyone. I am excited to be here today and talk to you a little bit about Able South Carolina, our Pre-ETS services. So we're going to talk about the logistics, how we do what we do, the way we structure our in-school visits, and we're going to talk about the impact that we've seen, how we measure it, some examples of impact, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the history and the evolution of our Pre-ETS services. We've got a picture on the right of the screen, which actually shows Mr. Troy at one of our summer programs. He is assisting a youth with a SMART goal planning sheet. So he is kneeling next to a student who's sitting in a professor style classroom chair. So that's a really exciting example that despite what he says, he actually does have his boots on the ground from time to time and still provides those services. So we are going to just start off. I'm going to just really briefly mention as a reminder what Able South Carolina is all about. We are a disability-led organization. We have been here since 1994, so this is our 30th anniversary. We are seeking transformational changes in systems, communities, and individuals. What's really great about us is that we are the state's oldest and largest federally recognized disability-led organization. More than 3/4 of our staff are people with disabilities, myself included. I know Troy just shared about himself as well as over 50% of our board of directors. We have since 1994 remained consumer controlled. We've remained community-based. We've remained cross-disability. Our goal is to make South Carolina a national model of equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. So we are working around the clock in all areas of South Carolina, in many counties and across all areas to make that happen. And as people with disabilities, we say our work doesn't end when we leave the office because we live it every day. So we get to bring our true passion through this. So now that you know a little bit about Able South Carolina, I'm going to talk a little bit about Pre-ETS services. And I'm going to start with the way we view ideal Pre-ETS services. So everything that we do for pre-employment transition services for our youth is filtered through this framework, which we use as our basis for creating all of our content. So we want all ideal Pre-ETS services to first be accessible. They need to be equitable. We want them to follow the principles of universal design, and we also want them to be based in principles of self-advocacy. These 4 things are going to be best practices for Pre-ETS services. So when we say fully accessible, our main tenets of accessibility that we need to think through with every material that we're creating. First of all, we ask ourselves, is it perceivable? Does it have captions? Does it have alt text? Are the fonts easy to read? Is the text easy to read? Can anyone who walks into the classroom perceive what we have? Second, is it operable? So we have to make sure that we have multimedia options. We have to make sure that we have keyboard navigation, right? We have to make sure that people can engage with the lesson and the content. And then we want to make sure it's understandable. So that means instructions need to be clear. We need to have plain language. We need to make sure that the content is organized in a way that can logically be followed through. So fully accessible. From there, we're moving to the principles of universal design. And universal design is a model for creating content that is designed to meet the needs of all learners. And that means that a lot of times we create new material that's designed to be changed, which means that we can adjust it to fit various classroom types. So it's going to mean that we're checking that each lesson has more than one way for students to share their knowledge. Call this multiple means of engagement. That means that we want a student to be able to tell us or share with us in more ways than a quiz or a test that they are engaging with the material. It's not every student's preferred method of sharing what they've learned. So we need to have multiple different ways that they can show us that they've learned that. We want to have more than one way that information is presented. So thinking about not just reading something out on a screen, but is there an activity that we can do? Is there, something that we can do that shows it in a different way? Is there an example video? Is there an activity? Is there an art project, right? More than one way that we're presenting the information. And then we want to have more than one method of encouraging student involvement. And this is really where the activity part comes into play with all of our programming, making sure that we have ways to keep the students engaged, keep them excited about learning, sometimes getting them up and moving around. That can be really helpful when you have that early morning class and everybody's tired. Get them up, moving, have them excited about something, right? So we have linked the UDL guidelines website. So if universal design is a newer concept to you, and you're wanting to learn more about these principles of universal design, I encourage you to check that out. It's going to go into a lot more detail. It's going to talk about the evidence behind these practices as being an ideal framework for setting up curriculum. And then self-advocacy. It's one of the most important things that, in my opinion, that we teach in Pre-ETS. And so we believe it should be a foundational element in all Pre-ETS programming, because our goal is to make sure that every student is able to successfully learn these concepts that we're teaching. And we want students to have that first step, which is learning how to advocate for themselves. That's really a central piece of the independent living philosophy. And as Centers for Independent Living, we want all of our students to walk away having a good understanding of that philosophy. And everything that we provide is designed to help them move towards that goal of living independently in the community in whatever way they are interested in. So we find that self-advocacy is one of the best places to start from. It's one of the best ways to successfully teach concepts like work readiness, like money management, because giving them those principles of self-advocacy is what allows them to feel empowered. And feeling empowered can make a big difference when you're giving them something like interview prep skills, or you're giving them something like budgeting. Having that feeling that they can advocate for their needs, advocate for support, advocate for in any kind of situation makes a big difference in their feelings about the level of success that they're going to have with those other concepts. So we want the goal of Pre-ETS to always be encouraging students to feel confident in that idea of independent living. And we have found on our end that a lot of times independent living is not something they have learned or been exposed to before we go in. So we get an opportunity to not only introduce the concept, but to hopefully by the end of our time with them, have them leaving feeling really confident about that concept. I want to pause before I move to how we provide Pre-ETS and just do a check-in. Do I have any questions or any kind of comments that we have about those kind of frameworks for pre-ETS services. You know that the chat is up. I just can't focus on everything at the same time. Okay, sounds like we're still feeling good. Troy, is
Yeah,
there anything in the chat?
I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Looks like
Fantastic.
people are soaking it all in.
Fantastic.
I will just jump in real quick and say, I know when we explain these things to teachers, one of the things they're a little afraid to tell us, but they're always thinking in the back of their mind is, well, that works, but not for my students. And this might be, I think VR also sometimes can share that idea of, well, we can only work with a certain type of student or a student who has certain skills. So I want you to know if that is a thought, even in the back of your mind, just know that that is it's sort of a shared attitudinal barrier. And it's because a lot of times we haven't really seen UDL in practice. We haven't seen this peer-to-peer self-advocacy in practice. So just encourage y'all to keep an open mind to it too.
Yeah, very, very true. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more now into how we provide those pre-ETS services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we lay everything out, how we scale our content for different learners. And if you guys have questions about it, please feel free to hop in. So we provide pre-ETS in a few different formats. So the first and most commonly requested format that we get is a 6-week curriculum set that's designed to assist with all areas of transition. So we have curriculum that covers self-advocacy, IEPs, we have curriculum that covers post-secondary exploration, we have one that covers principles of independent living, and the list goes on. You'll get that list in a little bit, but these are designed to be 45-minute sessions, so we have designed them to fit pretty neatly into a class period in high school. So that works out very well if we are going to a class where the students are moving in and out. Each lesson is structured in 3 sections. So we're always going to start with an introductory activity. These are designed to be fun. They're light. We're not imparting the big bulk of the content in this intro lesson. What we're doing is giving them something that they can refer back to when we get to the content instruction. So a lot of times this is something that's almost seems a little bit silly, but it's one of the things that they like, because we're also, with this introductory activity, separating ourselves from guest speakers that are going to come in and talk at them for a while and not engage with them in multiple ways. So we are giving them this fun intro activity. We use all kinds of materials. Sometimes they are walking around with hula hoops. Sometimes they're going from side to side and they're having lively debates about Chick-fil-A versus Zaxby's. Sometimes they are throwing balls around the room that have different colors, ball pit balls. So they're light, they don't hurt anybody, but sometimes they're throwing them around the room where they have to sort them. They're always light, fun. They're designed to be no longer than 5 or 10 minutes, but it's a fun introductory activity. Then we transition into content instruction. A lot of times my favorite question to ask is, why did we do that? And sometimes it will connect immediately for them. And sometimes they'll say, I don't actually know why we did that. And they'll say, I don't know, because it was fun. And that gives us an opportunity to connect it to our content instruction. So our content instruction is generally no longer than 15 to 20 minutes. We have everything written out in plain language. The way that we do content instruction can be scaled based on the support need of the classroom. So if we're in a classroom with high support needs, the method of that content instruction may be different. We may be using more visual aids. We may be having a few more questions that are designed to just kind of help with that comprehension is the word I was looking for, help with that comprehension. And then we transition from that content instruction into a main activity. Sometimes it is connected directly to the introductory activity. Sometimes it is different, but that takes up the rest of that 45-minute time. So that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And this is designed to give them a specific chance to use this activity to put something that they've learned in the content into practice. So one example might be for time management. Once we have learned about time management in our 15 to 20 minute content instruction, they get 10 to 15 minutes to try and see how many silly things on a list they can do. And each silly thing on a list is worth points. So for some classrooms, that means we're just going to try and do 5 silly things in 5 minutes. For some classes that are more competitive, that means they're going to break into 2 teams, and whichever team gets the most points in 20 minutes wins a prize of some kind. Usually we'll bring some swag from our offices that says ABLE on it or something fun like that, you know, and they get a prize. So we can scale what that activity looks like based on not only the support need of the student, but based on the classroom itself. So we get a chance to really take the temperature of a classroom in our first couple sessions with them. So we have a standard lesson plan that we stick with, but then by the end of the year, honestly, by the middle of the year, we're able to really quickly say, we know that this class is going to be really competitive. So we need to try and turn as much as we can into a competition because that's how they engage. Or we know that this group really loves art. So instead of doing that type of activity where they're moving around, I'm going to turn this into an art project. So that's one example of how we do those main activities. And all the activities are going to involve principles of universal design. That's really critical. So 6-week curriculum is currently our most popular requested option. We do have a compressed version of this, which is a 3-week curriculum. It's still 45 minutes. We try to get an hour, but we don't always. And what we're doing in the 3-week curriculum is rather than one objective a week for 6 weeks, we're teaching 2 objectives a week for 3 weeks. So for some schools that works better. We have that option if there's a short chunk of time, maybe before testing begins or before a school holiday, we can still fit in a full curriculum. We offer 1-day workshops, and those 1-day workshops are condensed even further. So we take anywhere between 2 to 5 hours, depending on how much time the school is able to give us. And we're going to take those 6 objectives from our curriculum, and we are going to condense it into a 1-day workshop. It's very engaging. We build in breaks, we build in time for them to stretch their legs, walk around, but we get to teach everything in 1 day. This is especially popular with our schools that are rural or our schools that just have a lot of stuff going on. So they can't commit to once a week sessions. That 1-day workshop is a great option because they just have to find 1 day on their schedule. And for the schools that are very far out, if they're 2-3 hours away and we can't commit somebody to drive 4 hours round trip once a week, we can send them to do a 1-day workshop. And then we also do 1-to-1 peer mentoring and goal setting. And this is where we go in and we are working with them to develop a SMART goal that they are going to hopefully work with us on. They have the option to work with us on it one-on-one, or they have the option to work with somebody else on it, but we give them a step-by-step set of SMART goals. So we provide in-person and virtual format. We provide both. We do also have a hybrid option wherein we'll do a couple classes in person and a couple classes virtual. We started the virtual option during COVID and we have continued it because it's another great option for schools that are too far away for us to send somebody to drive. It's also a great option for larger schools because they don't have to worry about somebody getting lost, moving from class to class or something like that. So both our in-person, our virtual, and actually our hybrid option all get requested each year. In order to track the impact and to make sure that we are imparting what we want to impart, we do progress monitoring after each lesson. This is generally 1 to 2 questions. It's written in plain language. We always have images to accompany it, icons to help them understand what the answers are. And we just collect it. They write their name on it. They write their answers. It lets us see if a majority of the class is understanding what we're trying to teach, or if we need to revisit this in a different format. So it's really helpful when we are adjusting curriculum. It also lets us see the impact because we're seeing the students engage with the material and get more excited to share what they're learning. And the final kind of big piece of what we talk about is our instructors. This is a big part of it. Youth with disabilities make up the vast majority of our pre-ETS staff. This is a really crucial part of what we do because when youth with disabilities are the ones that are making those connections with the youth, they're making it on a peer level. And we find the engagement is much higher because the youth understand that this is somebody who can give them not only the professional experience that they have, but their personal lived experience. And they're not older like, you know, some of us on this call might be. They're people who are younger. They're maybe just out of college. So they've just gone through this high school transition. It's not that far away for them. So having that ability to connect directly means that the engagement we find is overall a lot higher than it would be if we just let anybody into that position. So having youth with disabilities kind of be our boots on the ground has been a huge part of our overall impact and success. Like I mentioned earlier, I already kind of talked about this, but all of our lessons are made to be changed. The objectives are static, so we're always trying to get the same type of objective across, but the method of teaching them is going to shift. All the curriculum can be adjusted to fit a school's students. So that allows for students with high, low, or medium support needs to engage with the content. But it also means that if we have students where the makeup is a little bit different demographically, we can make shifts. We have a very rural school that they are a farming community. So they don't like any time that we mention foxes, because foxes are not a good thing to farmers. They steal their, they trample their livestock, steal their things, etc. They don't like foxes. We had a curriculum where the quiz gave you a result of an animal based on your conflict management style. One of those animals was a fox, and they got very upset when we would bring that lesson to their classroom because they felt so upset that they were called foxes, that they got the fox result in the conflict management quiz, that they just completely shut off about everything else that we said. So we made that shift. And we allow our transition specialists to think really creatively when they're teaching, because we want each school to have that unique experience so that they feel that their students are getting exactly what they need. Okay, I'm going to jump into history of services really quick. I wanted to make sure I don't have any questions, though, about kind of our structure. Fantastic. So, history of services, I'm going to just briefly go over this. We started in 2016. We had a contract with South Carolina Commission for the Blind. We started out providing pre-ETS to just students with visual disabilities. We had one staff member and one curriculum, and we tracked everything on paper, and we put data in Microsoft Word tables. Step forward to 2019, we got the contract with South Carolina Voc Rehab, and that allowed us to expand our service delivery to where we are currently. And currently, we now have 10 plus staff. We serve 30 schools and about 1,200 students. We have 8 different curriculum, and we are planning to expand. We have quite a few irons in the fire in that area. And like I mentioned, we've added those virtual and hybrid options, which has expanded our service range greatly, because now we have a more reliable way to reach those rural communities. So we are doing really well with our growth so far, and we're definitely really happy with that. So curriculum offered. This is a list of our current curriculum. I believe there's maybe one that's left off of there because it's brand new. But we have 2 self-advocacy curriculums, disabilities and accommodations, and foundations of a student-led IEP. We have work readiness, soft skills, we have money management, we have financial risk and protection, we have post-secondary exploration, which we also call planning a future, and then we have independent living. So each of these falls into one of those 5 categories that Troy mentioned at the beginning, and they've been pre-approved by vocational rehabilitation before we go in and we teach them. So, whoop, it went past me. So self-advocacy, disabilities, and accommodations. This is a curriculum where we're introducing that idea of self-advocacy. So that's that foundational concept for independent living. And we break this down into 6 lessons. We start with knowing yourself. We move on to talk about disability history and the concept of disability pride. We do a lesson on how to effectively communicate. We do a lesson on supported decision-making. That's really big and important for self-advocacy. So the concept of a supported decision-making team, having that group with you to make those decisions. We do a lesson on accommodations. So we talk about what accommodations are, why they're helpful. We also talk about why students should learn their accommodations. And then we finish up with learning how to advocate for themselves. So we do some examples. They get to come up to the front of the room and do some practice scenarios where they get to learn how to advocate. Work readiness. Yeah.
Oh,
Troy.
Lindsay, we do have a question in the chat too.
Yes, I love it.
Do you receive information prior to coming into the schools regarding students' level of support needs?
That is a really good question. Yes, regularly we do. We don't have any formal process by which they can click level of support need on any of our intake paperwork. But regularly we'll find that teachers will volunteer that information, usually because the higher the support need, the more they feel that it's not going to be successful for their students. So they feel the need to kind of pre-warn us that we're not going to get much done with this group, or this group's not going to listen to you, but you can try. So unfortunately, that kind of goes back to those negative attitudes that we've had, and those things that we have to maybe unlearn. But yeah, that's a great question. So jumping into work readiness, this curriculum is designed to give youth some skills to be successful in a range of professional environments. This is not really one where we're going to tell them they have to work here or work there. We're just kind of giving them a general set of skills that really can be applied to any kind of work environment. That way we're not limiting them in any kind of way. So we start off with knowing their skills, how we figure out what the skills are. We move on to what I call our management trio. We do one on conflict management, one on time management, and one on self-management. We talk about professionalism. So this is where we'll go over interviews. We'll talk about professional behavior, and then we build a resume. And so what's cool about this lesson is that each week we are helping them build a piece of the resume. So by the end, they have a fillable resume where they have a full interest statement at the beginning. They have all of their skills listed out. They have an idea of what they could put for school. And it's something that we start with just items that they can circle. So that works for students of various support needs. And we take it and we help them turn that into a resume. So that's a really cool piece of that curriculum. Then we have post-secondary exploration, planning a future. This one is most popular at the end of the year. So after spring break, we get a lot of requests for this one. And it's a comprehensive curriculum. It is designed to cover all these elements related to the planning of a future that hopefully is both realistic, but also something that the student can be excited about. It's desirable for them. That's the goal. So some of the lessons that we have, we talk about where they are now. What are they leaving high school with? We talk about goal planning, and we make sure to do goal planning with them as part of that. We talk about how to navigate barriers that come up. And we also do a whole lesson on post-secondary resources so that they know when they leave high school, these are just some of the agencies and organizations that are available to help them on that journey as they're transitioning into adulthood. Okay, real briefly, does anyone have questions? We feeling good?
We are right at about 15 minutes left. So I know one of the things that we talked about was some of the barriers in collaborating with partners, some of this getting your foot in the door. And so we are going to talk a little bit about that over these last couple of slides. There is a question in the chat. Are your youth transition staff people with education or teaching degrees? If not, how do you train the staff to be teachers? Lindsay, do you mind if I jump into this one real quick?
Well, sure, Troy.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to steal it from you. Obviously, I'm really just taking the answer out of your mouth. So one of the really cool things about Able South Carolina is that a lot of our youth are not people from education. So I myself, I do have an education background. I tried to be a teacher, did not work out, but I do have that knowledge. So that's been useful. But what we found to be an even bigger asset is to have a team of multiple skills. So we had a specialist who eventually became the director who had a dance background. We had people with yoga instructing backgrounds. We have a lot of people with art backgrounds. We find that although when people go through traditional education programs to learn to be a teacher, they learn a lot of great skills. Unfortunately, sometimes there is underlying ableist sort of thought processes embedded in those traditional teaching structures that we have to then go back and kind of help them unlearn and reteach in a different way. So instead, what we do is we have these basic skeleton lesson plans that can provide a lot of detail if you are using that. But we also meet pretty frequently. We always spend time during the summer getting together, and we review internally what has worked, what has not worked. So it's a lot of staff sort of building those skills up in each other, making sure that we have staff shadowing. We do make sure that part of our team always has that education background. But honestly, we lean into our staff not being teachers because we're not teachers. We're facilitators. We're coming in as peer mentors. So we don't really focus a lot on classroom management. We are there to kind of host a fun, accessible activity, create relationships, get some data to meet those reporting requirements, and hopefully encourage youth to take part in our other services and become advocates. Okay.
Yeah. That's
Relationships.
more or less it. That's more or less it. I personally have a film background and no education background, so and here I am. So, impact and successes. So since 2016, we have been able to serve thousands of students out, really honestly so many that we don't have enough data to really even give you a solid number because our data, we have outgrown our data tool. But it's well in the thousands because we're serving about 1,200 students a year, I would argue, probably more. And we create these lasting relationships with schools in that they ask us back year after year, and that's a real reflection of the value of the services. Each year, our youth transition specialists on their own, each individual YTS, as we call them, serves between 100 and 200 students per month. That does not include summer programming, and that accounts for another 50 to 100 students served in our various different summer programs. And on a qualitative level, these are just some of the success stories that we have gotten back. Some of these are reported to us by the students themselves, some of them from teachers, but students have reported using the lessons that we have taught them, able to help them in ways including, but not limited to, buying cars, changing their post-secondary track, advocating for changes to their IEPs, finding employment, living independently, and advocating for themselves with authority figures, including parents and school officials. So the uses that students find for the skills that they learn with us are varied and really exciting, which is excellent. So we'll address just a couple of these barriers that you guys mentioned, and we'll kind of talk about how we've handled them. So the funding barrier. I'll be honest, this is just a big one. I mean, funding is a strong barrier. So a couple of things that we have done, we have been able to leverage some funding from other programs to kind of help support our pre-ETS services. We have utilized fee-for-service opportunities. And like I mentioned, those one-day workshops that we've developed has been a huge help to funding, in addition to 3-week programs, because they are helpful for schools that don't have as much time to commit, but it also means that some schools, we are able to see them twice as much as we used to, because instead of seeing them for 6 weeks, we're seeing them for 3 weeks. So now we can do 2 sets of curriculum with one school in half the time that it used to take. So that's also been helpful for funding, because now we're billing twice as much. Integration and outreach. So a lot of our outreach has been grassroots connections with teachers. But like I mentioned, we have schools that ask us back year after year. And so we work really hard to build those connections. If we already have a positive relationship with a school, we want to keep and grow that connection. We have had schools where we start with just a one-day workshop. We go one day a year, and then the next year they like us, so they bring us back for 2 sessions. And then before we know it, other teachers start to see that we're coming in, and they start to see that the students are engaged. And so other teachers in that school's special education department, they want us to come teach their class. And then before we know it, that school has turned into what we call an all-day school, which means we're there from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. just going from class to class. That's happened quite a lot, just because we are building that connection. We do some digital marketing. We make sure that we maintain district level contacts, and we make sure that we are sending out information at the beginning of the school year and throughout the school year about the various offerings we have, so that new schools can find us. And then having those district level contacts is very helpful, because if we're in one school, somebody in the district can help us out. And we connect with VR. We've got pretty consistent contacts. We provide additional services to our partners. We're making sure that we invest in those relationships, and to assist with the collaboration process, we've also streamlined the registration process. I know some of you mentioned that VR changing the registration process has been a barrier. Us too, so we're working on it. And individualizing programs and engagement. This has really helped the most by keeping those Center for Independent Living values in mind. And remember that we're prioritizing those fundamental basics: accessibility, equity, consumer-driven choice. Those are really important, and that's going to help with developing those individual programs. And then measuring impact, creating or investing in a data tracking tool, and making sure that as your program grows, you are adjusting or changing that software accordingly. Make sure that you always have the right place for your data, the right home for your data. Make sure to review it frequently. We review ours on a weekly and a monthly basis to make sure we're not caught by surprise with anything when we get to end of year reports. Hosting end of the year feedback, we always send out surveys to teachers so that they have an idea of what we're asking, and they can tell us what they want to change. We also expand our curriculum often. Like I mentioned, we've got quite a few that we're working on to grow our offerings. And we also revise our existing curriculum annually, which is where our progress monitoring comes into play again for us, because we can use that to see if there's a gap in what we're teaching and we need to adjust it. So we, of course, still have barriers that we're working on, but we are working on solutions all the time to kind of just help us keep providing the best services. And we like to say that when students have access to quality pre-ETS services, they become strong leaders and advocates. So I am going to let you guys have a break from hearing my voice, and you guys can ask any questions that you have of me or Troy. Just go for it. Any questions that you have, we're here to answer.
I'm going to throw out a quick note too, because I am at a national conference now where we're hearing from RSA, and they are encouraging VR to make sure that they are listening to the disability community, that they are really working hand in hand with the community, especially with young people in the community. So VR does know that obligation of theirs to provide pre-ETS is to make sure that they're working directly with the community, and that's y'all. That's the Center for Independent Living. So I definitely understand there are some complications when it comes to referrals of services, when having to get your referrals directly from VR, depending on how your state's set up. I would encourage you, if you don't feel like you have the right contact at VR, if you feel like your discussions with them are not being as productive as needed, there are definitely other people to talk to, and RSA is also a good resource too. Obviously, we don't want to create a dynamic of going above someone, but sometimes it is a matter of, in order to display the value that a Center for Independent Living can have, it's making sure that the right voice is encouraging that. So if y'all don't have contracts, if you feel like your contracts have stalled, that is an option. And if you want to talk more, here's our emails. Here's our information.
Troy, we got a question in the chat. What does RSA stand for?
Man, it is terrible. They gave me the degree, and I'm so used to calling it RSA. I don't know if I've got that on the tip of my tongue. That's embarrassing. Can we?
This is Megan. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say Rehab Services Administration.
Thank you.
I can drop that link to their website in the chat as well from the U.S. Department of Ed.
Oh, well, I'm gonna get to our survey slide here. I think we kind of got all the questions. Sounds like, it looks like Troy was answering rapidly in the chat, so good. So if you wouldn't mind completing the survey below, we would appreciate it. There's a QR code as well as a link to the Google form.
And Megan, you said this will be sent out in an email as well, right?
Yes, we will distribute the link to the recording and then share the slides. And we're also planning to include the link to this Google form. So if you don't get to it right now, look out for that email probably tomorrow at latest Monday with the form.
Oh, smart. Someone mentioned in the chat they printed theirs out. That'll help with the QR scanning.
And this is part 2 in a 4-part series. So if you are joining us for the next one, I think it's, on the next one. So if you're joining us on the next one, it's going to be lessons from the field for CILs and facilitating pre-ETS. So in South Carolina, we're going to have our sister CILs join us to talk about that practical experience that we've had in facilitating. And that's going to be May 23rd.
Great. Thanks, Troy. And I think we're sort of wrapping up, so I'll chime in here just with the Google group. And I think Rebecca is going to drop in the link in the chat. Thanks, Rebecca. I see that there. But we did set up this Google group. It's a great way for you to contact the other participants in the community. So if you email that CILs pre-ETS1@googlegroups.com email address, that will send it out to everyone who joined this community. I know a couple of folks have had trouble accessing the Google group. I've troubleshooted one-on-one with a few people through our DETAC mailbox. If you're still having any trouble, please feel free to reach out to our DETAC Gmail account, which the email is somewhere earlier in the deck here. But yeah, that's a great place to go. And if you have questions in between sessions for the DETAC team, our facilitators, or each other, please feel free to post those in the Google group. Right. Lindsay or Troy, anything else before we get ready to close out?
Thank you all so much for the engagement. I hope this was really beneficial. You are going to have to put up with me just a little longer. I'll be at the next 2 sessions. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thanks.